Welcome to the Great Birth Rebellion podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Melanie Jackson. I'm a clinical and research midwife with my PhD, and each episode I cast a critical eye over current maternity care practice by grappling with research and historical knowledge to help you get the best out of your pregnancy, birth, and postpartum journey. Welcome to today's episode of the Great Birth Rebellion podcast. Last week we spoke about the option of home birth and if it was a good choice for you. This week we're talking to midwife Abby Sidery, who, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while now, you may have heard her mum, Cheryl Sidery, being interviewed on one of our podcast episodes, which was episode 79. She's been a midwife for over 40 years, and now Abby's also a midwife. Abby was planning a home birth, but she tells a story on this episode about her transfer from home to hospital and how even though she transferred, the birth experience was exhilarating. Nothing went to plan, but she's sharing her story, and I want to bring it to you as a way of describing and explaining that even if you're planning a home birth and it ends in transfer, this is not a failure. And your birth can still be exceptional just because you planned a home birth, even if you transfer to hospital. As usual, when I do birth stories on the Great Birth Rebellion podcast, you'll hear a little sound effect that indicates that I'm about to chime in the middle of the story and give a little bit of my own tidbits. I don't like to interrupt our guests when they're telling their own story, but in post-production, add a few little tidbits just to help build up the story. Let's get into it. Welcome to the Great Birth Rebellion podcast, Abby.
Why, thank you very much, Mel.
Oh, I was so excited to talk to you because you recently shared on social media about your birth and about all the unexpected twists and turns, but then your ultimate experience was quite positive.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I was really interested in sharing your story because so often women's births don't go the way they expected, and trauma and disappointment isn't always the only end result when things don't go as planned. So I'm really keen to hear how you felt through that experience and how you came out the other side feeling as you do about your birth. So before we kick off, I'd love to just, if you could introduce yourself to our listeners.
Amazing. My name is Abby Sidery. I guess first and foremost, Cheryl Sidery's daughter, who is a midwife, who's also been on Great Birth Rebellion and was at the convergence last year. I am a midwife. I've been a midwife for 8 years now, and I'm also a mother of two. So I've got a just turned 7-year-old daughter, Bobby, and a son, Felix. And I do childbirth education on the side too. So I've got a
That's right.
birth classes called Birth Circle that I've taken over from mum.
Are you currently working as a midwife clinically?
Yeah. So I'm working in a MAPS program. So that's continuity just for the pregnancy or the antenatal appointments. And then I do the postnatal home visits once they're in the community.
All right, well, let's get into your birth story. So this is 7 years ago, right? So first baby?
Yeah.
Let's do it. You start wherever you feel is most helpful.
Okay. Well, I guess to set the scene, mum was a home birth midwife my entire existence. She started doing, I guess, what you would call an apprenticeship during my pregnancy, or like a home birth apprenticeship. In my childhood, the first birth I went to, I was 6, and it was watching my best friend's little brother be born. That mum is now a midwife as well, and we work together, which is pretty cool. And then when I was a little bit older, I would sometimes go to births with mum if they had younger kids or something, and it would help look after them. So watching babies be born at home was something that I was pretty comfortable with. It was funny, like friends would come over during, after school for after school play or whatever, and there'd just be like a photo of a perineum stretched over a baby's head on the dining table, or like that was our norm at our house back when people printed photos. Anyway, so then I went on to do MIDI. So that's kind of backstory. Felt pregnant, and obviously the plan, well, not obviously, but I was pretty intent on having a home birth. That definitely felt like the right choice for me. There wasn't a lot of convincing, so to say, to get my partner on board. I mean, he'd been pretty heavily informed we'd been together for 7 years. So there was many dinner table conversations about home birth, I guess, compared to hospital birth. And I'd been a midwife for a year as well. So I'd done my year of postgrad midwifery, the graduate diploma of midwifery, and I'd been working in MGP for a year in the hospital. And I'd actually been going to home births as the second with mum in my pregnancy as well. So just, that stark comparison between what a hospital birth, even in the birth centre, the difference between that and we were birthing at home. It's quite, the decision to choose to birth at home definitely felt like the right choice for us. So, my mum was our midwife, super low complication pregnancy, literally so straightforward and didn't have a hiccup, which I'm incredibly thankful for. I was 39 and 6, had a bit of a show in the morning, didn't really think much of it. And then my sister and I were going for a walk along the beach, and then I just went, oh my gosh, full on gush in my leggings, like wet down to my knees. I was like, okay, I think my waters are just broken. Thankfully, a friend had given me some newborn nappies that had grown out of. So I sat on them. And then, I didn't really have much more fluid coming out, but obviously I was super excited. I was just like, oh my gosh, okay, this is cool. So that was on a Tuesday, 2 p.m., I think, roughly around that time. 2 p.m., waters are broken. I was pretty certain that's what it was. But it didn't have any tightenings or anything. And then, so just, we had dinner and stuff, went to bed. Then about 10 p.m. that night, I was asleep and woke up and was like, oh my gosh, I just felt a period pain cramp. Okay, ignore it. Don't think anything of it. And then I can't remember, felt, maybe it was half an hour later, felt another one. So I was like, oh, this is exciting. And then my partner, they were super, just all over the shop. I wasn't timing them or anything. So my partner was like, oh, should I go to work? Should I stay home? And I was like, go to work. And he's like, no, it's too exciting. So he got the bath set up with air and everything. He went and did some groceries and it was Wednesday now. And things had definitely picked up. I remember really getting like shutter vision whenever one would come and feeling really like they were super intense, but really spread out. And they were maybe like every half an hour, all of Wednesday with the sun being up.
Now here, Abby's talking about pre-labour rupture of membranes, where your waters break before you go into labour. We've done a whole podcast episode on this. It's episode 44. It's called Pre-Labour Rupture of Membranes. And you'll hear in that episode that hospital management of broken waters is a lot more time sensitive than if you've got your own private midwife. And you get really a bit longer. If you hired a private midwife, they'll often be more comfortable with waiting a bit longer than if you're in hospital. And so that's the context of what Abby's speaking about here when she talks about pre-labour rupture of membranes.
Then Wednesday night, it was like, okay, the sun went down. They were getting, super close together. They were lasting a minute. They were like 3 and 10 for quite a few hours. So then we got the midwife there. We didn't put water in the bath or anything yet. And I was using the TENS machine, was in the shower, was on the birth ball, kind of doing everything. So it really felt like, we're on. And then, I wasn't really able to talk. I was really just very much focused on just getting through each one. By maybe like 2 a.m., I think, or maybe 3 a.m., my partner was like, oh, I need to go have a snooze. So my sister was living upstairs. So she came down and she was just kind of helping massage my back and everything. And then they started really, they had been 3 and 10 and then they were like 1 in 10 and then they were like 1 in 15 and then the sun started coming up. And we also weren't 100% sure if my waters had broken. The fluid is totally clear and I wasn't losing that much. There was no scent to it. So then we're like, oh, maybe waters haven't broken. Not sure, but the sun came up on the Thursday and everything kind of fizzled out again. They were back to like one every 20 minutes, every half an hour. So we went to our local hospital because we were coming up to, that kind of 48-hour mark. I was looking at the Cochrane review, like trying to do research whilst also trying to like switch off, kind of thinking, should I be having antibiotics? Should I be being induced? But I felt, didn't know she was a she at the time, but baby was really active. Temperature was normal. Yeah, there was barely any fluid coming away. So I was like, oh, maybe it was weed. Maybe I had wet myself. I'm not sure. So Thursday afternoon, we went to our local hospital for a CTG. That was in consultation with mum. She kind of felt like, we should do due diligence, I guess, and I was on board with that. So I was booked in at our local hospital, which is about 45 minutes away from, or half an hour away from the hospital I was working at. I booked in at both hospitals. So had a CTG. It was literally perfect within 20 minutes, which if you've ever done a CTG, that's quite rare. And so CTG being like continuous heart rate monitoring for baby, which I'm sure everyone that's listened to your podcast is very well aware of.
If you're interested in the research about CTGs, we have multiple Great Birth Rebellion podcast episodes specifically on the use of CTG, 112, 113 and 114, and we'll list all of these in the show notes below.
The midwife that was doing the CTG, she said, look, why don't we do a speculum exam and we can test the fluid or, see if there's any fluid coming away. So a registrar came in, confirmed, definitely amniotic fluid. So, at this point, we're kind of 48 hours of water's being released. And they just said, look, we recommend you stay and have the Syntocin and drip. But I didn't feel that the urgency just yet. I mean, this was only, 7 years ago. But even at that point, it was still, that kind of 72-hour mark of prolonged rupture of membranes, to me, still felt safe. And I thought most women, what is it? I think like 96% of women will be in active labour by 72 hours. So I'm like, come on.
That's right.
I was like, we can do this.
Yeah.
So went back home, had, contractions. Sun went down, contractions increased again. And I swear they were 2 in 10 all night. And, we were just laying in the bed. I'd done like some steps. And so I didn't feel safe being out of our place, like mum was like, why don't you go down for a walk or just like, walk around the block. And I just felt very, being outside, I felt really vulnerable and very like, I felt really agoraphobic. I just wanted to be inside. So I'd kind of done some nipple stimulation and, pacing around the house and stuff. We watched a rom-com and then, sun was down, contractions increased again and just all night, had the TENS machine on and would like get up on all fours and just be like moaning and groaning for a minute and then would like flop down about like snoring my head off and then like 5 minutes later be like TENS machine up on all fours and my partner's massaging, getting the TENS machine on and then like flopping back down all night. But still I was like, these aren't contractions that are going to get a baby out.
Yeah. And this is still like the second night. Like this is night 2 of regular
technically kind of night 3. So it was like, probably 58 hours or something of waters being broken, or maybe a bit more. So then the sun came up again. Mum came at maybe like 9 a.m. and just, was checking in. How was your night? Everything was exactly the same. With the sun coming up, the contractions and kind of paced out to every 20 minutes or something. And we're coming up to that kind of 72-hour mark. Mum was like, do you want to go into hospital? Do you want to stay? These are the risks. These are the benefits of both kind of options. So at that point, I was like, I feel like we kind of need to get the show on the road here. So we decided to go drive the half an hour to the hospital that I was working at just because I knew everyone there. That Mum wasn't an employee at the Royal there at that point, but Mum had done basically her entire career there. So everyone knows who she is. And I was obviously still an employee there. Because Mum wasn't an employee, she had to just kind of be there in a doula role, I guess. And also one of her best friends who kind of introduced her to the home birth community, Shay Caplice, she also had come to be with us at home and kind of help us make a plan. And then she came to the Royal with us as well. So I had Mum, I had Shay, and then I had lovely, amazing MGP midwife Tess as well to look after me. She was the kind of delivery suite to midwife, if you will. So I was pretty well protected, guarded. I don't know what word I want to use there, but I had, the best of the best, really. So I'm incredibly fortunate. I absolutely don't underestimate how lucky I am to have access to that. So at that point, they did an internal. I was 7 centimeters, 6 or 7 centimeters, I think. Almost 72 hours of waters being broken, had the drip, and then had a few hours of the drip.
Here, Abby makes reference to the drip. Now, the drip refers to IV fluids that are put on in a continuous IV drip. And for the purpose of induction, the fluids include artificial oxytocin. Here in Australia, it's called syntocinon. In the US and elsewhere, it's called Pitocin. So when Abby talks about the drip, she's referring to the oxytocin drip. If you want to learn more about the exact process of induction, we've covered that in the Great Birth Rebellion podcast episodes in the past, 133, 134, and episode 33. I'll link all of those in the show notes.
That things intensified pretty quickly, and then got in the bath. Was in the bath for a few hours. I think the water was maybe a little bit too hot. It felt so good, but her heart rate was a bit high, so we got out of the bath for a little bit. And then her heart rate normalized because I obviously had continuous monitoring. So I got back in the bath. And then I just remember having a contraction, and then at the end of it, just hearing that pushing sound that my body just did. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've heard that sound before. I know what this means. I was like so excited. But this is all, no one would have known that I was excited. It was all literally my internal monologue. And yeah, I was just like, this is epic. It's finally happening. Oh my God. But I'm not joking. Every single contraction, my internal monologue was going, get an epidural, get an epidural, get an epidural. This is so awful. You can't do this. It's too hard. And then the second the contraction would finish, I'd be like, haha, you couldn't sit still for an epidural. You're fine. And then just be snoring. And then the same thing would happen again with the next contraction.
I'm curious to know if you felt, because with the drip, that I'm assuming that's a syntocinon drip, the oxytocin to get the contractions going.
Yeah.
And again, I can only assume that the CTG monitoring had telemetry so you could get in the water with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. So do you have any reflections on what contractions felt like without the synto, without the oxytocin, compared to when you had the oxytocin? Did you feel a noticeable difference?
I mean, they were definitely obviously closer together. But interestingly, when reading Rachel Reed describe how, there's no real stages of labor. They're just, we have these kind of peaks and troughs, and I can't even remember the words. I've just forgotten the words she uses for each kind of phase. But, the contractions that I was having at 3 centimeters at home, what I suspect would have been 3 centimeters, were as intense and full on as the ones at 8 centimeters. But then the ones at 6 centimeters were like half an hour apart and intense and would take my breath away, but then it'd finish and I'd be, back to kind of normal.
Yeah.
So it just they were definitely intense. Yeah. And I, wasn't speaking in between them, wasn't speaking during them. It was just couldn't open my eyes, couldn't breathe in, couldn't do anything. I remember them offering the gas, and I'm like, breathing out. And they're like, honey, you need to breathe in. You need to do a big breath in. I was like, I can't. It's just, oh my God. I'd done calm birth. I'd done all the preparation. I was fully prepared. Couldn't breathe in, not for 1 second.
Yeah. So then you started feeling this, what felt like an irresistible urge, and you identified that as, oh wait, this is what happens when women are getting ready to push their babies out.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So was pushing in the bath for a while, and then, nothing was really changing. So felt like the right decision to get out of the bath. I mean, ideally I'd been kind of hoping for a water birth, but, things change. So got out, was on the birth stool for a while and thinking I must be cracking on this. I'm killing this. This is awesome. I'm working so hard. I remember saying to the midwife, how much of her head can you see? Or how much of their head can you see? And she goes, none yet, honey. And I was like, oh, I can't do it anymore. I can't. It's just been going for too long. It's all too hard. So ended up pushing for 2 hours, I think. And then lots of different positions, on my back, on my front, all fours, on the birth stool, kind of everything. And then got up onto the bed. And then I was incredibly fortunate. Another person who's been on the podcast, lovely Andrew Bissett's, had been kind of hovering around the door, just making sure everything was okay.
Here, Abby is referring to Dr. Andrew Bissett, who we very affectionately refer to as the Breech Whisperer here in Australia. Abby and her mum, Cheryl, have worked very closely with Andrew throughout their careers, and so they have a very trusting relationship. We spoke to Andrew Bissett on the podcast before regarding breech birth on episode 26, and I've linked that in the show notes below if you want to have a look.
And he knew I'd been pushing for 2 hours, so hospital policy is obstetric review at that point, which by then I was just like, I'm done. Cut my leg off if that's going to make this go quicker. You can do anything. So Andrew did an examination. He said, they're in a really good position, but we are concerned about the heart rate. Is doing, big decelerations, but taking longer to recover. And it was funny. I was just at my absolute, I was done. I was absolutely done. And he said, would recommend we'll do a ventouse. And I was like, yeah, that's totally fine. And so he tried to get the vacuum on, but she had heaps of hair, so he couldn't get any suction. It just kept popping off. And then, so then he said, look, I think, do I have your consent to use forceps? And I was just like, yeah, you don't need to go through the full consent. I totally understand. And Mum said, now, Andrew, ask consent for an episiotomy, please. And he said, of course. And he was like, Abby, do I have your permission to do an episiotomy? And I said, no, thank you. Only as a quick kind of side note, as a midwife, oh my God, what was that thing that came in? What's it bloody called?
The perineal bundle.
Perineal bundle. Yes, that had just literally like a month. It came in just as I went on mat leave. So it must have been literally, like the first month of it. And he was a big kind of contributor to that actual thing. So he was like, look, recommendation is to have an episiotomy when you're having an instrumental. And I said, no, I know you can do it without one. So I'd prefer not, please. I'd prefer to tear.
Abby just referenced the perineal bundle, and we have absolutely covered the perineal bundle on the Great Birth Rebellion podcast before. That is episode 19. So if you're curious to know what Abby's talking about with the perineal bundle, which often involves episiotomies, then that is the episode that I recommend, episode 19. It's linked in the show notes below.
And then I honestly couldn't tell you how long it took, but it felt like she was out much, super quick after that. And she was fine. She went straight on my chest. It was utter relief. So I did have something called a pudendal block where, if you want to explain what that is, they do it, anesthetic into the pudendal nerves via the vaginal wall. So I could feel, the pressure and everything, but I couldn't feel the burning ring of my perineum. I felt like my clitoris was tearing, but it didn't. Certainly felt like it though, so I'm not sure what it was. And then the sensation of her body being born, of just like feeling like an octopus, just like, just being done and being like, oh my God, sweet relief. That was just the absolute best thing ever. And she had a tiny little grey somewhere on her face that was gone pretty much in a couple of hours. He inspected, I didn't need any stitches, which is incredibly rare with forceps, as you can imagine.
Yeah, and it also speaks probably to his expertise as well, I think.
100%. Yeah.
Obviously also to the integrity of your amazing perineum.
Well, of course.
Amazing. So forceps, no tears.
Yeah. Normal blood loss. I consented to active management because I was like, that's I've been in labour for a really long time, I think. But I think I kind of maybe like 200 ml blood loss or something. Couldn't believe it. could not believe it. I mean, that not many people's story goes like that, but the sense of triumph and utter power, I was just like, oh my gosh, that was the most intense, incredible thing I have ever done. And I just looked at her little face and I was like, oh my gosh, of course that's what you look like. Like, how did I not realize that? You're the most perfect thing I've ever seen. And I just was like, I was like up walking around. My partner was grey. He slid down onto the birth mat and just was like snoring so loudly because it had been days and days of no sleep. And it was like late on it. So she ended up being born like just before 8 p.m. on the Friday night. And then, Mum was like, okay, you're just going to go up to the postnatal ward for a couple of hours, come home first thing. Sorry, not a couple of hours, like to sleep there overnight, come home first thing in the morning. And I was like, no, I'll drive us home. I feel fine. Like, it's totally fine. Mum's like, Nick is catatonic. You have just had forceps and like almost a 4-day labor. No, you're going to go to the postnatal ward and just sleep. I was like, okay. But I literally just laid in the hospital bed like this all night. It was just
You're all buzzing off the adrenaline.
so like high, so high, just so like this, like euphoria, total. It was the best sensation I've ever experienced in my entire life.
So amazing. And I love that pretty much everything that you had planned did not happen.
Yeah.
No water birth, no home birth, none of that.
Yeah.
Yet, still at the end, you felt this incredible and this triumphant. I'm wondering if you have any insight into what elements of your birth made it so that at the end of all that, you still felt so incredible and so victorious.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a few things. I think before going into labor, I guess I was like, I was doing yoga, but I'm not someone who's like ever run a marathon. And so the thought of potentially doing a marathon that I certainly had not trained for, I was like, I don't think I've got that in me. I'll be really surprised if I can. So I think there was that level of like, oh my God, you totally just nailed that. And I think because I knew that I'd done the work, I'd done the preparation, I'd planned to birth at home. So I think when you plan to birth at home and it doesn't happen, for me personally, I think, okay, it was, there is always going to be a level, or there are always going to be something that teaches you that you just have to surrender to. You can't control it. You can do all the preparation and you can, be as prepared as possible. But for me personally, like if you choose to birth at home and it doesn't happen, that's not a failure. It's you've done absolutely everything and it wasn't just a fault of the system that it didn't happen. So I think that was part of it. I remember in my pregnancy, a student midwife saying, what do you really not want to happen? And I was like, I really don't want forceps. I think I'd prefer a cesarean than forceps because I'd seen some not very good ones. But it honestly was just the most incredible experience. And obviously just having, being surrounded by people that didn't, there was no like, you should do this or you should do that. It was like, here are your options. What would you like to do? And I never felt like any power was taken away from me. Everyone was so beautiful and amazing and just so supportive the entire time, even though it was such a long time. Like my partner was completely unwavering. My midwife's mum was like, I feel so bad. That would have been so stressful. It's your daughter and your grandchild. Despite it going on for so long, she just, stayed positive and didn't show me that she had any concern. Whereas after she was like, yeah, it was really stressful. But I mean, obviously I'm selfish at that time. I hadn't really thought about what it would have been like for her. When Sarah Buckley was on your podcast talking about oxytocin, and something really hit home for me that if you've already been laboring and then you have the syntocin and infusion, that can really, it can work, it can really boost and it can work quite well. And I was like, I reckon that's totally what happened.
This episode that Abby's referring to is episode 101 with Dr. Sarah Buckley, where we talk about the brain and the body in labour. I would highly recommend listening to this episode, and I will link it in the show notes below.
With Bobby's labour, for sure.
Well, and I think when your labour's augmented rather than started straight away, you know, firstly, your body's already ready to receive oxytocin. Yeah, and what I'm hearing from your story, all of the controllable elements that you could have controlled and made decisions about, you did. So you chose your care team, you chose your birthplace, your support team was on your side 100%.
Yeah.
And although you had all those interventions, they were delivered in a way that still allowed you to labour how you would have in water.
Yeah.
You know, these are, I think, a unique scenario in a sense that you had your midwives were able to facilitate the induction without letting go of everything, like without depriving you of having the water and being able to move around. And so, yeah, it just sounds like everything that you could control, you did in terms of choosing the people, and then also having been comfortable with the location because you're familiar with the space.
Yeah.
Sounds like that was all really protective.
Oh, hugely.
Yeah.
There's absolutely no way. Like, had I had MGP or, standard hospital care, there is no way it would have gone that way.
Yeah.
I would have been back and forward from the hospital, so many CTGs. But, even as a midwife, you don't see that. Like, I mean, technically I was in pre-labor for however many days, and you don't see that in hospital. You don't see how long that goes for and how exhausting it is. And it's like not really respected in hospital, I don't think. You're meant to just, kind of wait until they're strong and regular. But I'm like, well, they were strong and regular, and I was definitely not, my cervix wouldn't have been open enough for it to warrant even admission to hospital. But it was still like, if I didn't have the information that I already had, it would have been a Caesar probably on the Wednesday.
Yeah. And then, although we didn't intend to talk about your next birth, we could maybe just really briefly, was there anything more that you want to say about that birth?
Well, I guess just one other to add was that my pelvic floor, I'd never had any urinary leakage or fecal leakage or, didn't have any incontinence whatsoever. My pelvic floor was certainly heavy for a number of weeks, but never had any issues whatsoever. By 8 weeks, I was like, yeah, I feel, other than I'm now lactating and I'm a totally different person, but physically I felt, back recovered, I guess, but new and improved, I'll say.
New and improved.
Aww.
That's right. Which is incredible too because, there are, as you would know, some inherent risks with forceps, the pelvic floor damage, but it sounds like it was done really gently.
Yeah.
And did you have your next baby? Did all of the original plans eventuate?
Yes. So, Bobby ended up being born at 40 plus 2. And then Felix, our little boy, our number 2. So it was 2 years and 7 months later. It was a Friday night, literally the exact same time. It was like 10 p.m. I'd just fallen asleep and I woke up and I was like, oh my God, I just felt period pain. And I was like, okay, just ignore it. You've got ages. Fell back to sleep. 10 minutes later, had another one. 10 minutes later, had another one. 10 minutes later, 5 minutes later, had another one. And then Nick's like, my partner woke up. He's like, are you okay? And I was like, I think I'm having a contraction. And then it was just 3 and 10, super intense straight away. He was like, I'm going to fill up the bath. I was like, no, we've got ages. It's going to be forever. Because it had only been an hour. And he's like, no, let me just get the bath prepped so then I can just fully focus on you. I was like, okay. And then we called my mum. It was a low risk pregnancy. We called mum. She got there at, I think, maybe midnight or 1. And she thought I was probably like 9 centimeters at that point. Sort of gone super quickly. This is going to go really quickly. So they're getting the water in the bath. And then second midwife got there. I had Darusha there taking photos, which was amazing. And just went super quickly. I remember Bobby, our daughter, she was 2.5 at the time. She woke up and she came. We'd obviously been preparing her, and she just came and like cuddled me, and it was so beautiful. And then I'd have a really big contraction. She'd kind of sit back, and then then it would stop, and then she'd come back and cuddle me again. And then I had a rip roaring one that was super intense. And so my sister came and got her, and she went upstairs, and then got in the bath, got out of the bath, moved around, sat on the toilet, got back in the bath. By now it's like 5 a.m. I think, and they were still the same, just super intense, super close together, really, really full on. And I just remember looking at everyone saying, I don't want to go to hospital. I don't want to go to hospital. Everyone's like, you're not going to hospital. Everything's fine. I'm like, okay. Oh. And then look like fully staring people in the eyes and being like, I don't want to do this anymore. Someone else has to do it. Like, so ridiculous. It's not making any sense. Oh, and then I think it was like 6 a.m. So I'd been really, really intense for a really long time, or what felt like a really long time anyway. And so Mum said, do you want me to do an internal and we'll just see what's happening? And I said, yes, please. And she said, look, you're 9 centimeters. Do you want me to break your waters? Because I feel like you've been 9 for quite a while. So I was like, of course. First time waters break, and then not enough happens, and then this time waters won't break. And I was like, oh. So I was like, yes, please break my waters, please, please, please. And she said he was really quite high. Like, I mean, might mean anything to most of the listeners, but like -3, so still really high in the pelvis. But she managed to break the waters, and he was born 20 minutes later. And I'm not joking. It was like a freight train. It was so intense. I could feel every contraction, every push, like all the way down to my knees. Felt like all the bones were shattering into tiny little pieces and then coming back together. And I was just like, oh my gosh, but I was in the bath and I was kind of over on all fours. And then that pushing urge was just so full on. I think he was born in like 20 minutes or something. That was so full on. And I just screamed for like a minute and a half. I won't do it because people are not going to want to listen to that on a podcast, but I literally screamed, and we were videoing it. And my mum, you can hear my mum on the video go, I think she's pleased. I think she's excited. I'm not sure. And I'm just like looking at everyone and looking at him like, whoa, that was so hectic.
Do you have that video?
I do.
Oh my gosh. Can we share it when the podcast goes live?
Could actually. I've often thought about doing one of those, like, that beautiful video of the woman laughing just as she's given birth and she's just giggling. I've often thought like posting that and be like how I thought it would be and then how it really was. And I'm just like, I honestly sounded like a mourning Italian grandmother. It was
Oh my gosh.
really quite peculiar. And then I kind of came back down to earth and then screamed again because I checked and he was a boy and I was like, oh my gosh. Yeah.
This is like, but when you have your baby, the immediate moment after you have your baby, there's a huge oxytocin hit in your body. So it makes sense that if you're feeling comfortable and safe, that you just respond really dramatically. I laughed and laughed and laughed as my second baby was coming out. Like I couldn't hold it back. It was hysterical, like almost psychopathic laughing. And I heard my midwife whisper, what is she doing? It's just like, I can't explain what I'm doing, but like, I am so happy that this baby is finally coming out of, I was so happy that, and literally this child was moving through my body.
Yeah.
So, I'm not surprised. I can understand why. I just think it'd be so like the joy of birth just captured right there.
Yeah, it was definitely out there. But he was born at 40 plus 10. So that was a really long 10 days.
Oh my gosh.
We're getting to 40 plus 7 and then my partner was like, so what do we do if you don't go into labor? I was like, oh my God, I hadn't even thought about that. But then didn't have to do anything.
I just think there's so many beautiful little take-home messages for people here. I just think it's such a beautiful way to there's two stories that people tell. It's like, I got everything I wanted, it was amazing, or nothing went to plan and now I have to recover from trauma.
Yeah.
So I love that this does not sit in either of those steps.
Yeah.
And women can see that it's completely possible for things not to go to plan, but still be glorious, particularly with those elements of knowing your care team
Yeah.
and feeling safe with them. That sounds like a really pivotal and key part of your story, that you trusted Andrew and his skill
Yeah.
with the forceps, and that you had a team who was willing to go with you wherever it is you wanted to go, and that everything was done consensually and in your time, and that there were lots of little allowances made to make sure that, not everything was lost. So you still got to use the pool, and,
Yeah.
there was lots of things that could still be navigated.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it made it slightly easier in that, I was already a midwife, so they didn't need to be trying to explain the risks and benefits of a water birth when you're having, your labour augmented, because I already knew. I was just like, this is what I'm going to do. Okay, thanks. Which, I mean, technically women can do as well,
Right. So
Uh,
if they're informed enough to
Yeah.
be able to know, actually, I've already thought about this and I already have my decision.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's like, the midwife may not be allowed to put the taps on, but there are two people in that room that aren't midwives.
Well, the thing with hospital policy is those are the rules that the staff have to follow,
Yeah.
but the women don't have to follow policy. So yes, your midwife would be obliged to tell you, actually, in these scenarios, the policy states you're not supposed to get in the water, and then the midwife's done their job.
Yeah.
But you're a grown person, a
Up to
grown
you what you
woman.
do with that information.
Yeah. And you go, well, that's nice. Thank you very much. I actually will be getting in the water. And some places have rules about if your waters are broken for a certain period of time, you can't get in the water and
Oh, yeah,
all
potentially.
that stuff.
Mm.
But it does speak to the fact that while there might be policies about this, you're still the boss. So they're obliged to tell you what the policy is, but you don't have to follow it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Incredible. Thank you so much for telling your story. And I desperately hope that we can
Mm.
work out how to get that hysterical moment after you had your baby. I shouldn't have said hysterical, but that this
Oh, God.
frantic laughter, screaming.
Yeah, it's literally like I'm wailing. It's insane. Wait, yeah, I'll see whether I want to show my body naked on social media or
True.
not.
You'd have to feel totally comfortable with that. To get access to the resources for each podcast episode, join the mailing list at melaniethemidwife.com, and to support the work of this podcast, wear the rebellion in the form of clothing and other merch at thegreatbirthrebellion.com. Follow me, Mel, at Melanie the Midwife on socials, and the show at The Great Birth Rebellion. All the details are in the show notes.